start with the basics. What exactly is this impeachment process and how will it unfold? The Constitution gives Congress the power to remove a president before their term is up if enough lawmakers vote to say the president committed treason, bribery or other high crimes and misdemeanors. It starts with an investigation by the House Judiciary Committee, hearings are held and a vote is taken. If a majority of the House agrees to a resolution called Articles of Impeachment, the president is technically impeached. Something that's happened to two presidents, Andrew Johnson in 1868 and Bill Clinton in 1998. But being impeached doesn't mean the president is immediately removed from office. Think of it as an indictment. What happens next is the trial. That takes place in the Senate, presided over by the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. The House appoints managers to make its case, and the president has a legal team to make his. The Senate then votes and needs a two-thirds majority to convict and remove the president from office. We'll get to that later with Senator Blackburn, one of the 100 people on this jury. But just to be clear, there are currently 47 Senate Democrats, so it would take at least 20 Republican votes to remove the president from office. Okay, that's the official process. But what is all this really about? Well, there is a Maya Angelou quote the Democrats are fond of when talking about President Trump. When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. All right, then.
Impeach 45! Impeach 45! Impeach 45! Impeach 45!
If you're asking would I vote to impeach this president, the answer is yes.
I say impeachment, 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 impeachment.
Because we're going to go in there, we're going to impeach them.
They've been wanting to impeach Trump from practically the moment he was elected. On Tuesday afternoon, Nancy Pelosi jumped on the bandwagon with a statement quoting Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Paine to try and bring some constitutional legitimacy. But earlier that day, she let slip the real motivation.
What's more serious is that he can't win.
There you have it. The most serious thing is stopping Donald Trump being re-elected. It's not about the Constitution, it's about retribution. They hate Trump, can't believe he won in 2016 and are worried he'll win again in 2020. They lecture us about democracy and the rule of law, but they're the ones who want to use non-democratic means to get rid of a democratically elected president. This Ukraine story is just the latest pretext. First it was collusion, then obstruction. When none of that worked, they gave up for a few weeks. Oh no, they thought, we might have to try and beat him in an actual election. But then, just in the nick of time, a whistleblower came along, and boy were they excited. Here's Congresswoman Jackie Speer last week. She's on the impeachment committee.
And frankly, you know, this turned out to be a gift because it is so clear, so blatant, and so corrupt.
A gift! So much for Nancy Pelosi's BS about how sad this all is. Now, about that whistleblower who gave the Democrats their gift. The New York Times reported last week that he's a CIA bureaucrat. Let me remind you of another anonymous bureaucrat who made a splash in the New York Times, about a year ago. We know because they told us that there's an organized group of unelected officials actively plotting against the elected president they're supposed to serve. We also know that this latest attempt to overturn the 2016 election was put into motion just as the Democrats were giving up on the Mueller report as the basis for impeachment. And according to an independent Justice Department memo, this whistleblower is an anti-Trump partisan. His defenders say, trust him because he followed the right process. But that's not true. He followed the right process until his claim was rejected. Then it leaked to the press. Read the document he wrote. He comes across as what he is, a pompous, arrogant bureaucrat who's horrified by the idea that a political outsider could barge into his cozy ruling elite. Snooty establishment pearl clutchers say it's outrageous to disparage this person. That would never have happened under Obama. Can you imagine? Well, yes, if your name is Edward Snowden. When a whistleblower embarrasses Obama, he's vilified. But if he helps them get Trump, he's deified. What utter hypocrites and charlatans these Washington establishment types are. Any journalist who uncritically accepts the claims of this whistleblower is allowing their contempt for Trump to destroy their judgment. Now, what about the alleged wrongdoing here? The most serious claim is that President Trump withheld U.S. military aid as a quid pro quo for Ukraine to investigate Joe Biden. The media has put out what they call a damning timeline.
The call with the Ukrainian president happened on July 25. On August 12, the whistleblower filed their complaint. At the end of August, President Trump effectively put a hold on military aid money. On September 1st, the VP met with the Ukrainian leader. 8 days later, House committees started investigating. And by September 12th, right after Adam Schiff started to ask questions about the complainant, the aid was lifted.
They're claiming that Trump only released the aid once he knew Congress was investigating. There's just one problem with that timeline. It leaves out two crucial facts and one crucial step. First fact, everyone knows Trump is an aid skeptic. Holding up the aid to Ukraine is totally consistent with his policy position, with what he said repeatedly to other world leaders, to the NATO Secretary General, and to the president of Ukraine on that now famous phone call. Second fact, as Ken Vogel of the New York Times reported, Ukraine didn't even know the aid was being held up until a month after that call. How on earth can you have a quid pro quo when one side doesn't even know about the quo? Here's how President Trump explained it.
Can you explain why aid to Ukraine was stopped?
Because I think that other countries should be paying also. Why is the United States the only one paying to Ukraine? So I said, hold it up, let's get other people to pay, and then everybody called me, oh, please, can we pay?
And now we have corroboration in the form of Senator Rob Portman.
And on that date, I called the president because we were getting to the point where the funds had to be released. And the president was very clear with me. He only raised one issue, and that issue only, and that was about the Europeans not doing enough. I don't disagree with him on that. And, you know, we were kind of at the point where we had to obligate the funds so they could be effective for Ukraine to defend itself. So we needed to get the money going. But, you know, I think the president was interested in using the funds as leverage to try to get the Europeans to do more. That's what he said to me.
So here's the crucial step that's left out of the establishment timeline. On the 11th of September, Rob Portman calls the president. Later that day, the aid is released. It's got nothing to do with investigating Joe Biden. When supposedly serious and impartial journalists fail to include those details because they exonerate the president on the quid pro quo charge, they are deliberately misleading you. The Wall Street Journal had it right when it said about the Ukraine call and the alleged quid pro quo, the conversation was largely routine diplomacy, and even the reference to Joe Biden was less than promoted by the press. Good luck persuading Americans that this is an impeachable offense. Right, on to the second claim, that the president invited a foreign government to interfere in our elections. Now, let's not be naive. You think President Trump is the first American leader to bring domestic political concerns into the relationship with another country? At the end of their first meeting, Barack Obama leaned over to my old boss, David Cameron, and, to coin a phrase, like a mob boss, told him which side he should be on in the 2008 election. In 1992, the Bush campaign asked the British Conservatives for dirt on Bill Clinton. Those are just two examples I know about personally. Even the New York Times editorial board, while coming out today for impeachment, admits Trump is not alone in this. Quote, have other presidents conducted foreign policy with re-election in mind? Of course. More recently, the Democrats seem to spend their entire time trying to get dirt from foreign governments. Last year, a group of Democrat senators asked a Ukrainian official for dirt on Trump. In 2016, the Democrats reportedly tried to get dirt on Trump from the Ukrainian government, asking for Paul Manafort to be investigated. And, of course, the big one, Hillary Clinton, paying British and Russian government sources for dirt on Trump. Now, there's no doubt President Trump talked about investigating Joe Biden with the Ukrainian president. The Democrats in the establishment are resting their case on the words, I would like you to do us a favor. And here we come to the central, astonishing, brazen dishonesty of the Democrats and every journalist who claims there's something here on foreign interference. Let's read together the transcript of the call. Quote, I would like you to do us a favor, though, because our country has been through a lot and Ukraine knows a lot about it. I would like you to find out what happened With this whole situation with Ukraine, they say CrowdStrike. I guess you have one of your wealthy people, the server. They say Ukraine has it. There are things that went on, the whole situation. When President Trump asked for a favor, he's not asking about Biden, but allegations that Ukraine was somehow involved in 2016 election hacking. When he asked for a favor, President Trump was not asking for future foreign meddling. He was asking about past foreign meddling. Again, as the Wall Street Journal noted, quote, "There is nothing wrong with asking a foreign head of state to investigate meddling in U.S. elections." Later in the call, the conversation turns to Rudy Giuliani and allegations of wrongdoing by Joe and Hunter Biden. President Trump does indeed encourage the Ukrainian president to pursue these. But guess who brings it up? No, not President Trump, but President Zelensky. He's the one that instigates their back and forth about the Biden situation by bringing up Giuliani. You can argue that the president might have been wiser to respond by saying, you know what, that's getting into a political matter and we probably shouldn't talk about it. But the idea that this call and the so-called whistleblower complaint about it is evidence that President Trump abused his office for personal gain, called a world leader to ask him to get dirt on his opponent, meddle in our election, and used American military aid as leverage to make him do it, is a joke, a complete joke. Now we have evidence that it's a joke. The fact that the Democrats and their media co-conspirators are already moving away from it as the basis for impeachment. Remember how they dropped collusion and switched to obstruction? It's happening again. They know there's no case on the quid pro quo or the foreign interference, so guess what? Now it's cover up. The anti-Trump bureaucrat whistleblower, revealed that White House officials put the Ukraine transcript in a computer system designed for national security secrets, not run-of-the-mill diplomatic calls. Like sheep, they recite the cliche, it's the cover-up that gets you, not the crime. Are they serious? First, as we've shown you, there was no crime. Second, don't they remember that, shockingly, some of President Trump's early phone calls with world leaders were leaked? Why should anyone be surprised if the president's calls are made extra secure after that? But finally, the most obvious idiocy of the cover-up claim, the White House published the damn call proactively. Before any subpoena or legal process, they voluntarily published the whole thing. Some cover-up. It's incredible to me that any serious person could take any of this seriously, and yet we see every Democrat spouting this obvious nonsense, almost every news anchor doing it. We even hear that if it was a secret ballot, at least 30 Republican senators would vote to convict President Trump and remove him from office, unbelievably, in a presidential election year. There's only one explanation: class loyalty, ruling class loyalty. For 50 years, a ruling class of Republicans and Democrats, permanent officials in the government bureaucracy, big business bosses with their donations and lobbyists, have run the world in their interests. Their ideology was based on globalism, with two key components: free trade and open borders. Globalism made the ruling class richer and working Americans poorer. If you're operating on a global, not just a national scale, you can get much bigger and make much more money. If you open your borders, you can import as many new workers as you want and pay all of the rest of them less, so your profit margins are higher. In 2016, America elected a president who stood against all that and has, exactly as he promised, started to turn it around. This is why they're defending Joe Biden so ferociously. Biden is the absolute epitome of the corrupt ruling class. As I said on Twitter last week, the ruling class act all outraged about foreign interference in our democracy through election meddling. That's just not right, they scream. No, the right way to do it is to cut out the middleman. Don't waste time on stupid elections. Just have the foreign countries meddle directly in our government. Foreign governments interfere in our democracy every day in Washington through all the swampy techniques we've shown you over the years. Hiring lawyers and lobbyists, funding think tanks, and putting former government officials and current officials' relatives directly on their payroll. What total disgusting hypocrites they are. Nancy Pelosi took money from lobbyists representing shady companies in Ukraine. Chuck Schumer took money from lobbyists for the Saudi Arabian and Mexican governments. President Obama's former head of cybersecurity now works for Huawei, an arm of the Chinese government. President Trump's former defense secretary, James Mattis, now works for the swampy Cohen Group, which boasts about shipping American defense jobs overseas and selling American manufacturing firms to foreign countries. And, of course, Joe Biden. Forget about the Ukraine corruption. That's nothing. He took over $1 billion in bribes from the Chinese government, America's #1 adversary, in the form of payments to Biden family businesses, in exchange for policy favors. Hashtag Joe China. So, spare us the sanctimonious bleating about foreign interference. Biden, Pelosi, Schumer, the whole rotten, corrupt crew. You've been selling America to the highest foreign bidder for donkey's years, and yes, for personal gain. This is globalism in action. This is what America rejected in 2016, and the ruling class just can't stand it. There's one more aspect to this. On top of the economic devastation that globalism brought to working Americans and so many heartland communities, there's the cultural condescension, especially on the left, with their intolerance and hate and woke mania. The ruling class look down their noses at the very people who are the victims of their ideas. They sneer at their faith, even their food. The establishment's Trump hatred is not policy-based, it's class-based. They think he's vulgar. They mock him because he likes McDonald's. The policy achievements, most notably the turnarounds on jobs and especially China, they mean nothing to them. They just hate this peasants' revolt. That's why so many journalists are going along with this impeachment farce. They're part of the ruling class too. They're desperate to fit in at Washington dinner parties. They crave approval on media, Twitter. The challenge to globalism, the class prejudice, that's what the Trump impeachment is about. It is class war. We didn't start it, the ruling class did. But we sure as hell are going to fight to the end for the populist revolution.